Hello and welcome. If this is your first time, thanks for stopping by. My name is Ashley from Paper Tokens, and today I'm sharing a couple quick encouragement cards using some of my favorite Lawn Fawn dye ink cubes and the ink smooshing technique. To start, I cut some Strathmore watercolor paper into 3x3 panels. Since this can be a messy technique, at least for me, I made sure I worked on my Ranger craft mat. I pulled out a scrap piece of acetate, my Tim Holtz Distress Water Sprayer, and some selected Lawn Fawn inks. For ink smushing, this technique works best with dye inks since they're water-based. For each card, I used 3 different ink colors to do my ink smushing technique. I lightly press the ink pad surface onto the acetate sheet and spritz varying amounts of water. You may want to play around with how much water you utilize, and you can either use the acetate sheet, the Ranger craft mat as you'll see me doing later, or even an acrylic stamp block. I didn't want the colors to turn into a muddied mess. Not that I'm a color expert or color theory expert by any means, just from my varying experience. So I tried drying the panels in between each layer using my heat tool. You really have to play around with the amount of ink and water you use, depending on your preference and how much color saturation you want for each panel. This technique is one of the harder ones for me personally because I'm naturally such a control freak, and this technique tests me personally because I just have to wing it. But what I love about ink smushing is that most of the time I really like the organic look of each panel that you get just by how you manipulate your acetate sheet and the ink and the amounts of water. As you can see, in between each panel, I'm making sure I'm cleaning off my mat so the other ink colors don't transfer onto the current panel I'm working on. For the ink smushing look, you can either use watercolor markers like Zig's Real Color brush markers or the newest Arteza markers, or you can just use your watercolors that you paint onto the acetate sheet or your stamp block. For the different ink colors I use, because honestly I forgot to note which colors went with what card, you can check out my blog post and just see the full list of the Lawn Fawn inks that I used. Wanted to make sure that they dried all, and while they were drying, and I used my heat tool for sure, I pulled out my Misty stamping tool. I pulled it out because I knew I wanted precise stamping, and with watercolor paper having an uneven texture, I knew I would have to double stamp. And because of the double stamping, I knew I wanted to use VersaFine Onyx Black pigment ink, so my sentiments and my heart image would be crisp. And as I worked through each one, I made sure I set each panel aside, not trying to bump into it to let it dry. The particular stamp set I used is older and it's from American Crafts. I don't think it had a stamp name per se, but I know that it was designed by Jen Hadfield. She is awesome. So I'm making sure that I'm fitting my images and my sentiments the way I like, and making sure that my magnets keep it down as I'm stamping. I didn't want them to shift. For the card bases, I used Recollections Black 110 pound cardstock, and the panel measures to be about 3.5 by 4 inches. I used foam tape to adhere these watercolor panels to the card bases, and that honestly pretty much finishes up today's project. As you can see, after I'm done mounting them, I think in this clip I'm looking around for my foam tape and getting my scissors. But as you can see later in the clip, I had an excess of the card base that was hanging off at the bottom, and I'm sure that it would probably bug some people. So if you were to replicate this card or make your own version, you could potentially trim down the card base if you didn't want so much excess at the bottom or too much of a frame around the panel. Other options of doing more to these cards would be some gold watercolor splatters. I seriously thought of doing that. I was also going to look into my sequin stash, or maybe even some fun paper strips like glitter cardstock or pattern paper, if you just didn't want such a stark black or white frame. But today I surprised myself, and I think I'm just going to keep the cards as is. So if you liked today's project and would like to see more of my future crafty projects, please hit the like button and or subscribe to my channel. Come find me on social media too. I'd love to check out your work and get to know more people in this crafty community. So until next time, happy crafting!